What do Nazis, climate change, and aliens have in common? Yes, I know that sounds like the start of a corny dad joke. I promise it's not. What do they have in common? It's the fact that the United States wants to start a war against them in order to stimulate the economy. Just as economists look back and say World War II pulled us out of the Great Depression, and just like economists today say that the fight against climate change can help stimulate the economy, now it looks like the US government is prepping the US citizenry for a war against aliens, as this timing on the UFO information is just a little bit too perfect. I hope I am not right about this, because just as the government was wrong about the economic effects of World War II, and just as they were wrong about the economic effects about fighting climate change, they will be devastatingly wrong about the economic implications of fighting fake aliens. Ready? Let's dive in. Right now, Congress is being briefed on unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, because they don't want to use the word UFOs, for the first time in decades. But to be honest, the timing of this is a little bit suspicious. Why now? What motive could they possibly have for bringing this in front of the American people in the way they're doing it, with military intelligence saying we have no idea what these things are, no less? In order to answer that question, the first thing we have to do is take a little trip back in time to World War II. In 1940, U.S. unemployment was 14.6%. But just a few years later, towards the end of World War II, unemployment was down to 1.2%. GNP had doubled. There's huge progress with technology and innovation. And so World War II is looked at by many mainstream economists as being the reason that America was able to pull out of the Great Depression. The only problem is, it's not true. This is a classic example of the broken window fallacy. The broken window fallacy starts by looking at some form of economic spending, and it usually disregards the purpose or the need for that spending, only looks at the first order consequences of that spending, and if the result of that is good, then they say, hey, the whole entire ordeal was good. So they look at World War II and they say, hey, we had a lot of spending. We had a lot of people get to work. We had a lot of people build machines. We added to the workforce. We had all this growth of economic activity. Therefore, it was good, economically speaking. But as Per Byland points out in his book, The Seen, the Unseen, and the Unrealized, you can't just stop with the very first thing that happens. You have to look at everything, including the things that don't happen, which is very hard to do. So Bastiat is the one who came up with the broken window fallacy in its form about the broken window. It's about a boy who throws a rock or hits a baseball, breaks a window, and then his father has to go and pay to replace the window. The townspeople look around and they say, hey, well, that caused some spending to happen, and now that window maker has more money than he would have otherwise, and he can go spend it on other things, and so it's actually a good thing that the kid broke the window because that stimulates some spending, and people are better off as a result. But what is ignored here in this example is that the father now is left with less disposable income than he would have had before. Let's say he was going to go out and spend that money on a pair of shoes. Now the shoemaker doesn't have the money that he would have had otherwise. But even more important is the fact that the replacement of the window resulted in the same amount of real wealth, because money isn't wealth, money measures wealth, and money is a claim on wealth. But real wealth is goods and services. And so the total pool of wealth, when a window was destroyed and then was rebuilt, did not increase. Whereas if the father would have just gone out and wasted his money and spent it on a new window without that one being first broken, at least society would have been better off by having an extra window that it could have used for a purpose that a window would have needed to be used for. And so if we push this example to its extreme, it would be like the boy swinging a bat, hitting a baseball into a building, and the whole building just explodes and falls down. And now the entire community has to rebuild that building. Well, you very clearly see now you're diverting many real resources stone, wood, drywall, electrical supplies, like everything in order to rebuild that building, that city, that town, that society would be much worse off because you have to spend all those resources, all that saved up labor, all of your money, the capital will be diverted into just giving yourself back what you already had. And so you have a loss of real wealth, not a gain, not staying the same. And this is the exact same thing that happens in time of war. Yes, there's spending. Yes, there's an increase in economic activity, but you're taking real resources, steel, oil, supplies, food, people, and you're sending them off to be destroyed, to be wasted, to destroy other real resources like buildings. And also the biggest one is the loss of life of the soldiers who go and fight. All of this together results in a net drastic decrease in total wealth, not a net gain. Yes, you can have some winners and some losers, meaning empire goes out, you can have some big losers, and then in the case of America, some big winners because you take advantage of your empire, sure, but on net, you lose. Now, despite the obvious flaws in this line of thinking, once you've actually taken a moment to think through it critically, it caught on and it became virtually mainstream. Every economist out there accepts things like this as truth, even though they're garbage. So much so that economists who are Nobel Prize winners, like Paul Krugman, flaunt this fallacy when talking about aliens, but more on that later. Don't want to get too ahead of myself. Now, if we fast forward from World War II to just a few decades ago, central bankers around the world started to get very concerned about the environment, the green movement, climate change, global warming. We have central banks like the Bank of Japan unveiling a plan to boost funding for fighting climate change. Essentially, world leaders bought into this fallacy that we need a giant enemy for the world to fight against in order to stimulate the economy and cause growth. The only problem with a real war is that you have the death and the destruction. And so they came up with this brilliant plan saying, hey, if we can plant the seeds and get everybody on Earth unified and fighting against this large enemy that's outside of humanity, climate change, we can stimulate a lot of growth, stimulate the global economy, and we'll launch ourselves into a utopian future. The only problem with this is that, just as you might expect, there were some unexpected consequences. Because it turns out when you make a war on something like climate change and you say the cause of that is energy, you're really making a war on energy. When you make a war on energy, turns out you get less of it. And when you get less energy, you get an energy shortage. And when it turns out, when you get an energy shortage, people no longer care about the environmental impact. They just want to get the energy however they can. So you have countries like Germany who've been decommissioning clean energy from nuclear for years and are now subject to getting dirtier energy from oil and gas from Russia. So we're getting the war, the actual war, and we're getting all the dirty energy that we thought we were fighting against. It's just a win-win scenario. So now all these world leaders are looking around and they're realizing, didn't really go according to plan. Climate change isn't exactly an issue that's uniting the entire world to rally against a single cause outside of ourselves, making the world a better place. But instead of recognizing the stupidity of trying to pull the strings of humanity, they're now turning around and saying, well, the problem wasn't what we were doing, the problem was we picked the wrong enemy. Now enter aliens. Because for the first time since the 60s, Congress is getting briefed on UFO by military intelligence. And now the public is being made aware for the first time ever of confirmed military sightings, hundreds of them, of objects that defy the laws of physics, that move faster than any aircraft or object that humans have the capability to create, that stop on a dime, creating G-forces far larger than any human body could absorb and stay alive, and then disappearing and reappearing in a flash, literally objects defying the laws of physics, where their instruments have confirmed these are physical objects and confirmed the speed. Hundreds of these. But why now? One more trip back in time to 2011. We're going to look at that brilliant Nobel Prize winning economist, Paul Krugman. Because in 2011, he started saying something that today sounds like an ominous prediction about the future and the future power grab by governments, and not just the ignorant, stupid economic prescription that he was making. Watch this.
Think about World War II, right? That was actually negative social product spending, and yet it brought us out. I mean, if we discovered that space aliens were planning to attack, and we needed a massive buildup to counter the space alien threat, and really inflation and budget deficits took secondary place to that, this slump would be over in 18 months. And then if we discovered, whoops, we made a mistake, there aren't actually any space aliens.
So we need Orson Welles, is what you're saying.
No, there was a Twilight Zone episode like this in which scientists fake an alien threat in order to achieve world peace. Well, this time we don't need it. We need it in order to get some fiscal stimulus.
Oh, well, my mistake. If the Twilight Zone had an episode about it, it must be true. But in all seriousness, this is why at the beginning of the video I said I hope what I'm about to talk about does not come true. Because what it looks like is happening right now is, number one, the same mistake that central planners and interventionistas have always made when looking at the economy. They've always looked and they've said, hey, as long as we can pull the right strings, we can get the outcomes that we want. Instead of just saying, anytime we try and pull strings, it causes major problems, so we should just stop pulling strings and let people do whatever they want. And it turns out that when you give people freedom, they create the most wealth that's ever been created in history. No, we're going to completely ignore that. We're going to keep on saying, well, we just haven't pulled the right strings yet. So on the backs of World War II and saying, forget all the destruction we caused, look, we caused a lot more employees and a lot bigger tax base. Woohoo, that's a win for us. And instead of saying, hey, we failed with trying to get people to rally against this global cause for climate change and this green movement, and in fact it actually caused massive devastation and is now causing wars and is now causing many countries to be subject to dictators and evil regimes. No, instead, we need a bigger enemy. A bigger enemy that is outside of humanity, an enemy that is aliens. And if we rally hard enough and unify strong enough, and if we surrender our rights and give up our basic needs for the good of humanity, we can pool all of our resources to fight against these aliens, because this is a bigger threat than humanity has ever faced. Bigger threat than the Nazis, bigger threat than climate change. We've got aliens we need to fight. And the taxes and the spending and the new rules and regulations will all trickle down to a utopia with strong infrastructure, massive leaps forward in technology, and anything else that they want to say will be a positive result of this. But just like the boy's broken window, you do not cause economic growth, a net increase in wealth, by redirecting resources towards a war effort. Whether that war effort is the Nazis, or whether that war effort is climate change, or whether that war effort is aliens. You are going to, at the very least, get a misallocation of resources, and at the worst, have catastrophic losses. So I hope I'm wrong about this, but you let me know what you think, whether this is suspicious timing, or whether this is the first time in history where when a politician's mouth is moving, this time, since they're talking about aliens, now they're not lying. As always, thank you so much for watching. You guys have a great day.